Welcome to Look Up with Kelly Bell, and I have Scott Davis with me. And he has a very unique story, dear friend, but highly intelligent, but aware of his surroundings. And there are so many other things I could put with this, but this is a wonderful story on how when you are sucker punched by life, by an event, um, how would you react? You know, you always think that. Well, he had it to happen. And I love the example he's going to set for us on how you take the resources of your environment and make a plan in a stressful situation. So I want to turn it over to Scott Davis.
Oh, thanks, Kelly. Appreciate that. So, I want to uh, talk about the morning of 9/11 and the events that pertain to me during that time. I was while the 9/11 event was unfolding in New York City and at the Pentagon and with Flight 9093. I was actually on my way flying to Connecticut, and I was flying from Evansville to Evansville, Indiana, to Detroit, Michigan, and then connecting and going to Connecticut. And it was a business trip. I had a colleague from Japan who, for the first time, was flying into the country, and as I was getting into Detroit, he was flying into Chicago. So, and it was the first time he'd been to the United States. So, our plan was to meet up in Connecticut for our meeting that we had there. So that morning, when the rest of the world was learning about what was happening, I had flown again into Detroit and we had landed and I'd come into the terminal and I went to the kiosk or the desk where they list the flights, and every plane. It was a beautiful day, clear sky, beautiful weather. So uh, when I looked at the board, every flight was delayed. And I'd never seen that before where, it's a clear day, it's a morning, everybody's traveling, and yet every flight was delayed. And I asked the lady that was attending to the desk, I said, uh, my I've got a connecting flight to Connecticut. When do you think the planes are going to, be ready to fly? And she said, I don't know. And that really puzzled me too, because usually in a delay, there's some reason for it that is known, and they'll share that with you, or get back with us here in a little bit. But she was, it was a very broad statement, and of course I was anxious to get to Connecticut. I had work to do, and like many people do when they're traveling like that and work, they've got a plane to catch, and they want to get on with that. But so I was a little anxious about that, and I asked her, um, do you have any reasonable time that this or my flight might be ready? And she said, all the airplanes have been grounded. And I said, excuse me? And she came back to me and said, all the planes have been grounded. And I said, why? I said, I've never heard of that. And she said, well, because a plane has hit one of the World Trade Center towers. And in my mind, from time to time in New York, little small planes will hit buildings. So that really didn't register with me. What I was about to learn, and I just said, so okay, but I've still got my flight to catch to Connecticut. And she said, no. She said it's a pretty serious issue, and you can look down the corridor of the terminal. And I looked down that way, and nearly everybody in the airport was down there surrounding a TV, watching what was unfolding. And instantly I knew there is something significantly wrong here. Didn't know what it was. And so I hustled down to the TV just in time to watch the second plane hit the I think it was the South Tower or maybe the North Tower. It was it was the other tower. And you knew instantly. I mean, that everybody knew instantly that the first plane hitting was not an accident, that this was a terrorist attack. And as soon as that happened, everyone in the terminal, they when the human being has a really significant emotional event, people really behave in a very bizarre way, in different ways. And there were people running up and down the corridors, screaming, crying. There was panic, pandemonium. It was very, very chaotic. And but for me, in those kind of situations that I've been in, things for me become very surreal, and I'm able to pull back and slow down and just be quiet and observe as to what's going on, so I can just mentally process what is actually happening with that. And so knowing that knowing that they also had a plane, they had three planes that were still unaccounted for at the time, so everybody in the airport was nervous about that, with lots of planes, on the ground with fuel on them, and what might the terrorists do next? And Flight 93 was actually headed towards Detroit before it turned around and started headed back towards what they believed to be either the Capitol or the White House. And then obviously those heroes jumped in and took that plane down themselves. But it was very, very scary and very unnerving, to say the least. So in that, uh, then uh, then the objective became, okay. I've got a colleague who has just got to this country. He's never been to the Chicago airport, and so I immediately called him, and he was panicked, didn't know what to do. And he said, Davison, what do I do? What do I do? And I said, look, I said, give me a few minutes to think about this, but I want you to take a taxi, and I want you to go to to a hotel close by and check in, and then I'll call you back when I've got a plan to get over to you. I said, but I will get over to you. But if you remember back at that time, on that day, all the businesses were shut down. all the all the ATMs were down. You couldn't get cash. You couldn't rent a car. You couldn't buy a car. You couldn't lease a car. And so, your options were very limited as to what you might be able to do. And the first thing I thought of is, well, I'll jump in a taxi, and I'll run over to Ann Arbor, a much smaller regional airport, not close by to Detroit. But I thought, well, maybe they still have a car over there I could rent. And so I ran downstairs, got into the taxi, and we hustled over there. The other thing that I realized is I didn't have very much cash, and banks were closed. There was nowhere to get cash. Credit cards were not being accepted. You could only use cash, and I had about $75 on me, and that was it. So I knew that there was going to be some at some point there was going to be a challenge with having the funds uh, to get back home, which was my ultimate objective. So um, I we get over to Ann Arbor, and there's no cars there. They're all gone. They've all been taken. There was just nothing available. And so the taxi driver said, what now? And so I thought for a minute. I said, hey, we just passed a U-Haul company, and I remember seeing vehicles in the parking lot. I said, run me back over there. I said, I'm going to try to see if I can rent a U-Haul truck or, something that could, that would be a vehicle to get us, to get me to Chicago and then back home. So I went over there and went in the door and explained explained my story to them that I really needed a vehicle to get home, and they said, "Well, yeah, we'd be glad to rent you one, and but the only thing that we have available is a box truck, a small box truck." And I said, "That's fine. It doesn't matter. Anything that can go, that would be great." And so I jumped that, signed the papers, jumped into that, and headed off to Chicago. Now, typically, going from like Ann Arbor to Chicago is like a 2.5, maybe a 3 hour trip at the max. And I'm in a U-Haul truck that got about 10 miles to the gallon. And the other thing that was going on is gas was being rationed. So I had to stop often throughout the day to get in line and then get some gas and then drive a little further and stop and get in line and get some gas and drive a little bit further. And so it took the entire day to make it all the way over to Chicago. I got on the Kennedy Expressway. I got to, and the whole time I could only pay cash for get the gas. And by the time I get to the end of the Kennedy Expressway, the last toll, I'm getting off there. All I had left was 7 cents, and the toll was like $1.50 or something. And I told the lady, I said it's, I said this is all I've got. I have nothing else. I have nothing else. I said I this is it. But I've got to get off here and I've got to go pick up a work colleague who's nearby. And she was so nice and just said, "Look, go ahead and go. That's fine." And so, thankful for that, and went to the hotel. And Mr. Sakamoto, who he was a young salesman, he had young family. He was obviously just absolutely scared and very unnerved by what was going on, let alone it being his first time in the United States. And I knocked on the door, and when the door opened up, he saw me and he jumped in my arms, and I was glad to see him, and he was glad to see me, and so I felt very very good that I'd made that contact with him and was able to get him, and he was thrilled that I was there to pick him up as well too, and so I asked him, I said, "Look, Mr. Sakamoto, I got a really important question for you." I said, "This is critical." And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "Do you have any American money?" Because I knew he had Japanese money, but do you have any American money? He goes, "Oh yes, Davison, I have $200 of American money." And I said, "That's great." I said, "We will get up early in the morning and we will head for home." And then we had the solution. And so we got up the next morning real early before daybreak. I wanted to get up before there was any traffic. And we headed off and headed south. And the things that stuck in my mind as we were headed home, going down the interstate, were people who were up on the bridge with American flags, flying them back and forth, and people who were very, you could see just already an instant unity of the country over reacting to, hey, this is America. This is the home of the free and the brave, and you could see that just right away, which was very uplifting to anybody that would see that, and really, America showed itself, in a very positive way under very dire circumstances at the moment. And
That's
so
what you saw from the road, people waving flags,
waving, yeah,
past.
waving flags and just people standing up there waving and cheering cars that were going by and we were blowing our horns as well. I mean, it was very much a rallying type of situation. And this is just the next morning, and people were still trying to figure out, what exactly had happened and what was going on and those kind of things. But how quickly any type of differences of opinions or political persuasions you might have had, those all melted away instantly, and we're all just Americans, and you get right back to the roots of how this country was formed and founded and established almost 250 years ago now. And it was great to see and very inspiring, because it helped me and helped many people just press on. We're gonna stick together and we're gonna move on. So we we head back home, and what I needed to do is my car was parked in the airport at the Evansville airport, the regional airport there. And I knew I'd already heard that all the airports had been shut down, and they were also all manned by the FBI. And so I was expecting an encounter with the FBI as soon as I pulled into the airport, and then it has a long entryway, and sure enough, as soon as I was in there, and I had myself and Mr. Sakamoto with me, and so uh, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw two FBI SUVs come up behind me, black SUVs, and then two come straight at me, and they blocked me in very quick. And Mr. Sakamoto, it scared him because again he'd never seen anything like that. And he said, "Davison, what do we do?" And I said, and I was just trying to be a little lighthearted. I said, "Well, I'm an American, so I'm okay." I said, "But with you being, from Japan," I said, you may be in a little bit of risk here." And he goes, "Oh no." I said, "No." I said, "No, you're not." I said, "Just be calm and do whatever they tell you to do, and we'll be just fine." And so they told us to uh, turn the vehicle off and slowly get out of the car, and don't make any sudden moves. And you could tell the guys had, typical FBI. They had the heavy coats. You knew they were packing weapons. You knew that they had the sunglasses, and there was two of them in the back, two of them up front, and they wanted to see my driver's license, and they wanted to know what in the world was a U-Haul truck, a box truck, similar to what you might remember at Oklahoma City with Timothy McVeigh and the vehicle he used. And I kind of thought about that too. I knew that this was coming as well, but it was suspicious nonetheless. I fully understood that, and I just told him. I said, "Look," I said, I told him that I was on business and told him the whole story. I said, all I'm doing is coming down here. I said, I've come to get my vehicle, which is over in the parking lot. It's a red Blazer. I said, all I want to do is go over and get that vehicle and then be on my way." And they reviewed my license and, did a background check. They have that kind of capability even back then. And they said, "Okay," said, "Mr. Davis, get in the vehicle, get back in the vehicle. You go straight over to your car. One of you get out and get into your vehicle, your personal vehicle, and then you leave. And understand that there are people who are watching you from the rooftop of the airport. And if you make any other motion or do any other thing other than what you and I just talked about, then you can expect a reaction from us. Do you understand?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And so Mr. Sakamoto slid over into the U-Haul. I got in on the passenger side. We drove over and uh, got over to my car. I got in it, and just so happened that just down the road was another U-Haul place to drop off, and I pulled in there and went inside and dropped off the vehicle. I went in and was ready to pay with a credit card or to be invoiced. I was on company business, And they said, "Mr. Davis, there'll be no charge." And I said, "Are you sure?" And this was a lifesaver for us. I said, There's no other way I could have gotten home had it not been for this." And they said, "No, it's on us. We're glad you're safe. We're glad you're home. It's okay." And I said, "All right."
Class.
And so, yeah. And so when I got back to work, and that was like the next day, we went right back to work. I sent an email to the president of the U-Haul company, thanking them for, number one, letting me being able to use uh, that vehicle to get home, to go get my work colleague, and then to come home from Chicago to back to Evansville, Indiana. And the fact that they said that it didn't cost me anything, I wanted to thank the president of the company myself, and I did, and I told him I just very much appreciated it, that I was willing to pay for it, and I'm still willing to pay for it, but I just wanted to say thank you to him for that. I got an email back from him. I don't know if it was that afternoon, but for sure the next morning, and he said, "Mr. Davis," he said, "I'm so glad that you thought of us, and that you and your colleague made it back home safely." He said, "It's on us." He said, we're not going to charge you for that." He said, "But I also want you to know that in the country that day, you were one of just 5 people in the country who thought to go rent a U-Haul vehicle to get back to your house." and he said he said that was really something else. So I, and to me, it's in a chaotic type situation, you're just trying to understand, what your options are. You're trying to understand the risks that are involved in it, and you're trying to make every step count because you're limited on resources. Um, you obviously, had to solve the problem of getting a colleague who had never been in the United States, and he was stranded, and then be able to figure out a way to get home, and uh, was able to do that. It was just a few years ago, in the 20th anniversary of 9/11. My son had called me and said, "Hey, Dad, you're on Facebook," and I said, and I'm not, I've never been on Facebook. I don't have an account. I've never been on it ever. And I said, what in the world am I doing on Facebook?" And he said, "The story of what you did on the day of 9/11,
20 years later.
20 years later, is still being told on Facebook." And I thought, wow, that's incredible. But it was just, to me, it was, again, assessing the situation, uh, understanding what resources are available, and then solving the problem, and we got that done. So, yeah.
I tell you, if you wanted to know the sentiment of the country at that time, just listen to Toby Keith. A
Yeah,
lot of you
yeah,
young kids that weren't here, thank goodness for that. Toby Keith put in words in songs, about the mighty sucker punch coming flying in from somewhere in the back.
yeah.
And America didn't just lay down; they unified. They came together, and pride was everywhere. This year's our 250th anniversary or birthday party. And I just can't wear enough red, white, and blue. I can't be, I am so proud to be in a country that we live in that we're free. We're free.
Right.
And, our wonderful forefathers died for that right. And just don't take your freedom for granted, because when Scott got up that day, he didn't, he just thought it was going to be a beautiful day and he was going to go to work and
That's
it was
right.
going to be a day. And then, as you can see, how life can change on a dime. And all of us remember where they were and what they were doing that day at that time.
Yes, ma'am.
Those planes hit those towers and we lost those precious lives.
Right. Yeah.
But thank you, Scott, and thank you for the example you set for us all. Because, guys, it's just always good to be prepared. It's always good to and to. My husband's always saying, look around you. There's always help around you through
Yeah.
people or resources. There's always help. You just have to stop, breathe, and think.
Yeah, I think that was, that's so critical that, when you get into situations and it seems overwhelming, and I've been in several of those, not that catastrophic, but for me, just exactly what Kelly said is you step back, you take a breath, and you assess the situation and understand what your options are, what your resources available to you are, and then you just go to work and solve that problem. And the underpinning of that is we live in a country where you can do that, right? So it's the land of the free, home of the brave, and it's so important that we're able to do that, and I was able to do that with a colleague who was from Japan, who he was absolutely frightened, which I would have been as well too.
Yes.
Um,
Country and
yeah, and so but it's a testament to the American, to us as Americans, and the backbone of our country, and like with the Toby Keith song, that America is going to stand up and fight, and they're going to do it in a very methodical, disciplined way, and get the job done. And
yes.
when I look back at that particular day and that particular event, that's exactly what was happening. And it, to me, I just wanted to get back home. I wanted to go get my friend, and then get back to my family. And that was the best I thought that I could do. So
Well, I thought you telling that story is so timely right now because everybody, this July 4th, get out and celebrate our country's birthday. Our country has been good to us, and you get out with your community, get with your family, and celebrate her birthday.
yes, very
God
much
bless the
so.
USA.
Yeah, that's right. That's a very important time, in the history of our country. We're still a young country, really, by standards of other countries. But if there's ever been a country, and a lot of countries have have been established, and in time have gone away. But if there was ever a country that could keep on going, not by our wealth, or not by our differences of political differences, but by the sheer will of the Americans, and the blessings from God. And with that, if we stick with that, then the political differences that we have, or the disagreements that we have amongst us, again, when the chips get down, like they did on that day, nobody was talking about political differences. Nobody was talking about social turmoil that was going on. We were all unified, and that continued for
Yes, it did.
several months. and
Yes.
and but it goes back to the founding of this country, and how our founding fathers did it. And it's turning out to be, what a great testament. Here we are 250 years later, and still going strong. So that's great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott, very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank
And
you,
thank
Kelly.
you